Hello Army! Welcome back to Taekook Update Channel. BTS steps out of the apartment. Everything seems normal until you notice this. Jungkook doesn't stop. He walks straight to the car like he's in a hurry. No hesitation, no looking back. But then look closer. Taehyung comes right after him. Not just following, but matching his pace, staying right behind like he doesn't want to be even a step apart. No words, no signal, just timing that feels too exact to ignore. Everything was under control until suddenly something changed. The crowd was getting louder, security was tightening the line, and the car was already waiting. This was supposed to be a quick exit, no stops, no risks. But then, Taehyung did something no one expected. He slowed down and looked at the fans. In that one moment, he made a choice that completely broke the plan. You can actually see the crew hesitate, even panic, because this wasn't what they prepared for. And before anyone could react, Jungkook noticed. He didn't call him back. He didn't stop him. Instead, he followed. Not just following, but watching closely, staying right beside him like he already knew what could happen next. Fans reached out. Cameras went wild. The situation got intense. But what happened in those few seconds, the way they moved, the way they stayed together, that's the part no one is talking about. And once you notice it, you won't be able to unsee it. The moment didn't end where most people thought it did. It only began there, in that narrow space between control and instinct, where everything felt like it could tip in any direction. The noise kept rising, phones lifted higher, flashes bouncing off every surface, turning a simple walk into something that felt almost unreal. Security adjusted their positions, trying to read what would happen next, but the rhythm had already changed. Taehyung moved with a calm that didn't match the tension around him. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't reckless. It was deliberate in a way that made the situation even harder to predict. The distance between him and the fans disappeared faster than anyone expected, and suddenly it wasn't about schedules or exits anymore. It became something quieter, something more personal, hidden in the middle of chaos. Jungkook stayed close, not in a way that drew attention, but in a way that felt constant. His focus never drifted, his steps adjusting with every small movement Taehyung made. There was a subtle shift in his expression, one that only lasted for a second, but it carried something heavier beneath it. Awareness, maybe, or something that had nothing to do with the crowd at all. The barrier between them and the fans was still there, but it felt thinner now, almost symbolic. Hands reached forward, voices overlapped, emotions spilled out faster than they could be contained. And in the middle of all that, Taehyung didn't pull away. He leaned into it just enough to be present, just enough to make the moment real for the people who had been waiting. What made everything more intense wasn't just the decision itself, but the way it happened without hesitation. There was no visible signal, no coordination, no pause to reconsider. It was instinct meeting instinct, and somehow Jungkook was already in sync with it, neither trailing behind nor stepping ahead, but matching it in a way that felt unspoken. Security tightened again, their movements more urgent now, trying to close the space that had opened. The path to the car became narrower, more controlled, but the energy refused to settle. It lingered, stretching the moment longer than it should have lasted. Every second felt heavier than the last. And then, almost as quickly as it began, there was a shift, a subtle one. Taehyung stepped back just enough for the distance to return, not fully, but enough to signal that the moment was ending. The crowd reacted instantly, louder, more desperate to hold onto what had just happened. It was fleeting, but it didn't feel small. Jungkook moved at the same time, closing the space between them again, his presence steady, almost protective without making it obvious. It wasn't something that needed to be shown openly. It was there in the timing, in the way he never let the gap grow too wide, in the way his attention never left. As they moved toward the car, the tension didn't disappear, it shifted. The crew regained control, guiding the situation back into something structured, something safer. But the atmosphere stayed charged, like something important had just happened without anyone fully understanding why. The door opened, the final steps approached, and for a brief second, everything slowed again. Not visibly, not in a way that cameras could easily capture, but in the way the moment settled between them. There was a glance, quick and almost impossible to catch unless you were looking for it. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just enough to suggest that everything that had just happened wasn't random. And then it was over. Or at least it looked like it was. The car door closed, the noise outside became distant, and the space that had been filled with chaos suddenly felt contained. But something lingered. Not in the crowd, not in the movement, but in the way the moment refused to fade as quickly as it should have. Because once you replay it, once you slow it down and look past the obvious, there's something else there, something in the timing, in the choices, in the way one step led to another without a single word being exchanged. And that's the part that keeps people coming back to watch it again. Not the crowd, not the chaos, but the quiet detail hidden inside it. The one that feels too intentional to be accidental, and too subtle to be explained right away. The clip didn't fade from attention the way moments like this usually do. Instead, it began to spread, slowly at first, then all at once. Different angles surfaced, each one revealing something slightly different, something that didn't fully match the first impression. What seemed simple from one side looked more layered from another. That's what started to stand out, not the fact that he followed, but how quickly he aligned with it. The crowd became background noise in those replays. What took center focus was the space between them, the distance that never stretched too far, the way it was constantly corrected without drawing attention. It created a pattern, one that repeated in small ways throughout the clip. Even when the situation tightened again, when security stepped in closer and the path narrowed, that pattern didn't break. Jungkook didn't move ahead to clear the way, and he didn't fall behind to avoid the tension. He stayed exactly where he needed to be, as if that position mattered more than anything else happening around them. People began pointing out the same moment from different perspectives, a slight turn of the head, a shift in pace, a glance that lasted less than a second. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they created something harder to ignore. What made it even more compelling was what didn't happen. There was no visible communication, no signal exchanged, nothing that could clearly explain how everything stayed so in sync. And yet, the coordination was there, woven into the movement so naturally that it almost disappeared unless you were looking for it. The more it was analyzed, the more questions it raised. Was it habit built over time? Something that no longer needed to be spoken? Was it awareness sharpened by experience, reacting faster than thought? Or was it something quieter? Something that didn't need a clear explanation to exist? No single answer seemed enough. And that's why the moment kept pulling people back in. Because it wasn't just about what they did in front of the fans. It was about everything surrounding it, the build-up, the reaction, the aftermath that lingered longer than expected. It felt like a small window into something usually kept out of sight, something that only appears for a second before disappearing again. By the time the clip reached its final seconds, when the car door closed and the noise faded into the background, the focus had already shifted. It was no longer about the crowd or the situation. It was about what connected those movements together. Jungkook mirrored that restraint in a different way. His attention never scattered. While everything else felt unpredictable, his movement stayed grounded, almost anchored to Taehyung's pace. It wasn't protective in an obvious sense, but it carried the same weight, the kind that doesn't need to be shown to be understood. As more people revisited the clip, another detail started to surface, something easy to miss unless you focused on the edges of the frame, the crew's reaction. There was a moment where their movement paused, not fully stopping, but hesitating just enough to reveal uncertainty. It lasted less than a second, but it said everything about how unexpected the shift had been. Plans existed for a reason, and in that instant, those plans had been quietly set aside. Yet, nothing fell apart. That was the part that didn't fit the usual pattern. Situations like this are supposed to escalate, to become messy, to spiral out of control. But this one didn't. It stretched, it intensified, but it never broke. It held together in a way that felt almost deliberate. And then there was the ending. Not the obvious one. The car door closing, the crowd fading, the security tightening again, but the subtle ending, the one hidden just before everything disappeared from view. A final adjustment in position, a last glance that didn't linger, but didn't feel empty either. It passed quickly, but it left something behind. Something unresolved. Because even as the moment ended, it didn't feel finished. There was a sense that what people saw wasn't the full story, just the part that happened to be captured. The rest stayed out of frame, in the seconds before and after, in the choices that didn't make it onto camera but shaped everything that did. That's why it keeps pulling attention back. Not because it was loud or chaotic, but because it was quiet in the middle of noise. Because it hinted at something without fully revealing it. Because every time it's replayed, it feels like there's still one more detail left to notice. And maybe that's the real reason it lingers. Not for what it shows, but for what it almost reveals, and then keeps just out of reach.